Yeah, there you go. Wow,
I
that sounded like a sad trombone a little bit, didn't it?
All right, get on with it.
All right, everybody, welcome to Bugle Notes, which is our podcast here at Reveille Wealth Management. So this is our inaugural recording here. So the whole purpose of Bugle Notes for us is where we sound off on topics that are relevant to our clients, things that they're interested in or we would want them to know more about. And so it ties back to our partner Joe Purdue, who went to the U.S. Military Academy, that at West Point they have effectively an anthology called Bugle Notes, where there's a number of things that they want the cadets to know and study and be familiar with over time, and it's gathered in the Bugle Notes. And so that's what this is meant to represent or to signify for our clients. And so we're going to talk about a number of different topics along the way. Some of it's going to be market related. Some of it's going to be financial planning related. Some of it's going to be retirement plan consulting related. We may throw in some other obscure things like travel and things like that.
Keep it a little bit interesting, right?
That's right. That's right.
Otherwise, we might bore everybody.
That's correct. But so today it's me and Chad.
Yep.
And
glad to be here with you.
So we're going to be talking about eras today, dynasties. What else? What else are we going to talk about today?
Well, the coming to an end of those said eras and dynasties. That's correct. Right?
Yep.
How that's happened in the past, and we're going to talk about a recent one, right?
Yep.
It's kind of dominating the news of late, which is in college football.
Yes.
And then maybe look at some previous ones and how that may all tie back to in the market, seeing similar eras or dynasties that may be changing.
That's right. When we say eras, it's very Taylor Swifty.
Yeah.
I want to stay away from that piece, right? Even though I know there's a lot of Swifties out there.
Including Adriana, who is helping us do this whole thing.
That's right.
We don't want to, upset her.
That's right. But so one of the dynasties that has, we don't know if it's yet come to an end, but the era in college football that has come to an end is that Nick Saban has recently retired. I felt like it was kind of a bombshell announcement when it came out, even though maybe nobody should have been surprised.
Yeah.
Because he's been there for so long, and it's hard to find a tenured football coach, period. But when you've had somebody who's been there for that long, he was there for how long? 16 seasons? 17 seasons?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
I wonder if he kind of, let it slip or gave any hints to anybody that if we don't get into the national championship.
No, I doubt that's the way that he did it. But my guess is he had probably shared some of it with their athletic director. And so, my wife is from Alabama. And so all of her family went to Alabama. And so I've, somewhat become attached to the program.
Yeah.
And so,
being a tech guy, it gives that way at least have something to root for.
Listen,
right?
I'm always going to be a white and gold guy to the day I die. But I've followed the Alabama program closely here over the last number of years. But so Nolan and I were actually down in Ocala, ready to meet a client for dinner down there, and the news broke, and we were kind of sitting at the bar, and it was just kind of shocking. And so it was related back to the markets, that we know that the markets are cyclical, meaning they go through cycles. There are periods where you have one thing that does well for some length period of time, but that nothing in this world is forever. Right. Nothing in the markets is forever, right? And so there's been a number of these persistent trends in the market here for a number of years. And maybe a lot of people are accepting or thinking that those are just going to continue forever, but they can't, right?
Yeah, that's right. And bringing it back to the Alabama thing, tried and true Alabama fans, I think many of them probably became very complacent with Nick Saban is, he's our guy, and it's just going to be this way forever, right? And never thought, or I'm sure they probably thought, but didn't think it was anytime soon that era would end. And in a similar way, large cap growth investors in the U.S. market, for example.
Sure.
Right? That has been the dominant asset class in the U.S. equity market for a number of years. We've talked about this in some of our recent videos.
That's right.
Hopefully you guys have seen those or can check those out. But some videos we've done on
we can link to them.
Yeah, market extremes that we've highlighted, and the first one we highlighted was large cap technology stocks in general dominating, having this kind of dynasty of dominance in the U.S. equity market for many, many years, and it's kind of become a complacency thing, right?
Yeah, well, I think that so humans are just conditioned beings, right? And so whether it's from an investor's perspective, whether it's from a football fan's perspective, that when it's happening to you, right? So I do think that these Alabama fans, they have no idea how special this run has been for them.
Oh, yeah.
Because for most teams, they'll catch lightning in a bottle for a single year, even to be able to, repeat it for a second year is even rare. But to sustain and be part of the national conversation and expect from Alabama's perspective to be competing for a national title every year,
right,
is just something that doesn't happen. But they have gotten to the point where if they're not in that conversation, then they're going, well, what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And so similarly with investors in the U.S., we've seen the U.S. market be the top performing global equity market really for 12 years, 13 years, right? And without many hiccups, there certainly have been some along the way.
Sure.
But now you've got people that are saying, well, why would we do anything else?
Exactly.
Right.
Is it even possible that something else besides, the U.S. is going to dominate or
Well, because at any point in time over the last decade or so, anything that you've allocated to something outside of large cap U.S. stocks, it's underperformed likely.
That's right.
Yeah. And so a lot of people feel like they've left something on the table or they've been burned by trying to do the prudent thing.
Sure.
And diversify. And so people are now asking themselves, like, what's the point of diversification, right? And I think you probably hit on that in some of your videos.
Yeah.
Who was the guy who came on CNBC and kind of 1999-ish did the whole diversification is dead or
it was
asset
a market
allocation
strategist.
is dead.
I forgot his name now, but I remember, and I kind of mentioned it, I think, in one of those videos. But yeah, back in that time frame, late '99, right near the peak of the internet bubble. I think you might have been a little bit younger than me at the moment, but
I've been a certain age younger than you my entire life.
So given that you weren't watching the markets closely at that moment, even though you're an incredible student of the markets, right? You're
Amen.
astute studier of market history. In contrast, I was actually living it, right? I was in the trenches, so to speak, then. And but I remember, distinctly watching CNBC. Back then, it was just as popular. I guess probably not just as popular as it is today, but it was growing tremendously in popularity.
Might have been more popular back then with as many people that were
there was some
trying to do the day trading thing, and like the E-trades and stuff were new-ish,
there was
right?
Some, good personalities on there too. But all of a sudden, a top market strategist came on and basically said these words. And I was already very concerned about the market being at an extreme at that point, and didn't do the full version of what we do now, our rules-based investment discipline, but still was an actively allocating kind of minded money manager, and was concerned about the extremes that existed from a contrarian perspective. It's like, this is just getting ridiculous. And this market strategist came on and said, highly regarded strategist who said, asset allocation is dead. All an investor needs to do is invest in technology stocks. That's really all they need in their portfolio. And I was like, I remember it was like very kind of, it was a kind of surreal moment, because like, did he just say that?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's got to be one of the ring the bell moments, you know?
Sure.
And then what's interesting is, recently there's been some similar talk out there from people that are saying, you know, all you need is large cap growth. All you need is the S&P 500.
Yep.
Which happens to be dominated by large cap growth for the most part because of the construction of it. And you're good, you know, and why do anything else? And so kind of like, you know, again, bringing it back to Alabama fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, there's really an expectation that this is just going to continue. You know, we were talking today about another era, switch gears a little bit, the Braves.
Yeah.
Right? Being
in
Atlanta
the 90s.
boys, the Braves in the
that's
90s. Right. They had a heck of a run there, 15 years maybe or so.
Yep.
16 years, similar to Nick Saban.
How many pennants in a row did the Braves win? Mike, can we look that up? I know as a Philly guy, that's going to, you know, you're going to love finding that out.
I think it was like, I want to say 15 in a row.
Yeah, it might have.
Was it? Yeah.
Let's see.
It was probably there. There it is. So at that time, remember, we were talking about how it was just expected that the Braves were going to, you know, just win. And you even made a comment. It was kind of like, you know, why even bother watching them in the regular season?
Correct.
We're just
yeah.
Gonna, you know,
kind of. No, I mean, that's where it got to. I mean, so you know, I grew up going to a lot of Braves games, so we had season tickets, or you know, my dad shared season tickets with some of the guys that he worked with at Delta, and I still miss Fulton County Stadium. It was so great.
That was fun.
But it was such a blast growing up with that. And again, I didn't realize how fortunate I was growing up in Atlanta and being a part of that, right? So much so, I'll tell you this. So when I was a kid, and you know, when they would sing the national anthem, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end, when they were talking, I thought they were saying like the home of the Braves, and I'm like, yeah, right. So that's how, like, in a bubble it was, that you know we were just fortunate, to be a part of that, and then you kind of atrophied to where it was like,
right.
well,
it bred complacency.
Yeah, it's like, well, of course we're going to the World Series, you know. Yeah,
true. How many at bats do you have at the World Series and not win?
Well, and so, but it's interesting that I got to the point, and I think a lot of Atlanta Braves fans did back then, that you knew you had a very talented roster, and you just anticipated that we're going to be in the World Series, or at least going to the NLCS. And 162 regular season games is a lot to watch, you know. And so it's like, you know what? I'll just wait until we get into the playoffs, or deep into the playoffs, and then I'll start paying attention. And all of a sudden you like a true Braves fan. Well, and so all of a sudden you're they're not showing up in those contests at the end of the year, and you're going, what's going on?
Yeah. There you go. And all of a sudden the cycle changes. That's
right. And so it gets to this idea that we're conditioned beings.
Right.
You know, we've talked before about how I had this white paper I was writing, Pavlov's New Dog.
Yep.
And you go to the Pavlov and his dog, right? Actual study, right? Psychological study, where he's got this dog that he wants to train it to salivate when he rings a bell, right? So two things that would seem to be, completely separate, not related to each other. But he has this dog, and he would ring the bell and provide it with food, right?
Yep.
And so all of a sudden the dog is associating, when I hear the bell ring, right, I'm going to get fed. I start to salivate. And after a certain amount of time, he could simply ring the bell and the dog would salivate. So that dog was conditioned to expect when I hear, here's the bell, I'm gonna get something that I want. Right. My question is, how long does it take for that dog to unlearn that behavior? With investors, how long does it take for them to unlearn
Sure.
the behavior of I want to be more exposed to large cap growth stocks, right? Or it was the bond market.
Yeah.
The bond market was in an uptrend for 40 years, and the industry had all this data that said that you just manage your risk by virtue of asset allocation, have money in bonds, and if the stock market goes down, the bond market goes up.
Yep.
And you almost couldn't argue with them because they had all of the data for all these weeks, months, quarters going back 40 years.
That's right.
And there's an entire industry of asset allocation that's built on all this data that they've gathered over that period of time. And it finally really got challenged in 2022 when the stock market was down, but the bond market was down just as much.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so the question is, how many times when the bell rings for investors and they don't get the result that they anticipate, how long does it take for them to unlearn that what they're doing is not working anymore?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, it's a great kind of subject to explore further.
Sure.
And market psychology is, you and I are both fascinated by it. It's interesting to see the markets ebb and flow and essentially almost act like a living being, because they're driven by, ultimately they're comprised of, markets plural globally are comprised of people making decisions.
That's right.
Millions of people making decisions, and many of those decisions are made from this kind of position of being driven by these extremes of
or
fear,
emotions,
greed, or
right?
emotion. Yeah, exactly. And so typically what we've seen is it does take a while for people to their behaviors to change, their perspective to change, and a lot of times it's only after these extremes have unfolded. So, for example, let's go back to international stock. U.S. stocks dominating versus international stocks.
Yep.
We've talked about, and we mentioned this in this video series recently, that historically there's been, somewhat of a routine kind of zig and zag between U.S.
It's almost been like a rhythm.
Yeah,
right?
rhythm. Yeah, like 5 to 7 years kind of time frame. And then all of a sudden now we're in this 14th, 15th year now of U.S. dominance versus international. And so, I think it's going to take quite a bit for, if international does kind of take the baton and run and start to do better, and U.S. stocks start to lag, it probably would take a couple of years of that for people to kind of finally catch, take notice and say, hey, wait a second, I need to have some international stocks, don't I?
I think it's interesting that that the word that you use there to frame it is if, right, and not when.
That's right. Yeah, even I guess, have been.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been beaten right into submission on that, but the reality is that it is a foregone conclusion that it will happen, and it's hardest to try to make those points when you're in the climax of those extremes. And of course, we don't know exactly where we stand in the annals of market history, but we can look back at other periods of time where the rest of the world has been the dominant region, right? It has not been U.S. equities. And so, we could look back at the 80s, kind of the late 80s. When
leading into the early 90s, Japan.
Yeah, well, Japan. Yeah. I mean, so the Nikkei was on fire, right? And I guess at the time, obviously, I was too young, but there was this sentiment that the Japanese were going to take over the world, right? Whatever technology, that they had, or, you had Honda and Toyota and all these automakers that were breaking into the U.S. market, that type of thing. I guess, Sony was big, right? Nintendo was a new thing.
I don't know, was Nintendo around by then?
Yeah.
I think that was later.
No, I think...
we need to look that up. When did Nintendo come on the scene? Did it? I didn't play games too much, so I'm not quite
Let's
in the
see.
know
I'm
on
gonna
that.
I'm gonna tell you that when I was young, I was definitely doing the duck hunt.
If that was a Nintendo game.
Okay, when did the first console come out? That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
Let's look it up.
that's
Let's see.
well. So while he's looking that up, so the dominance of
But
the
so
Japanese
so
around the
Jap-
world was. I mean, you could see it in the fact they were buying up property everywhere too, right?
well, and so but
All over.
here's the interesting thing, and so my buddy JC Parets at All Star Charts, he tells this story, and I'm gonna believe that it's true. I would like for us to verify a little trust but verify mission here, in the spirit of the '80s. Ronald Reagan, trust but verify.
Yeah.
That at the peak of the bubble in Japanese assets, right? It wasn't just the stock market, right, that went through the roof.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, so the Nikkei 225, which is basically their S&P 500, traded to 38,000 in 1989.
Yep.
Here we are in January of 2024. It is trying to get back to that level right now. So a massive bubble that popped, right? But it was also in their real estate, and the biggest bubble was that, and at the time, this is the anecdote that JC shares, that the square mile or something around the Imperial Palace in Tokyo,
Right. In
Or
Kyoto, right?
or in Tokyo,
Is it in Tokyo?
yeah, in Tokyo, I think.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
But that little postage stamp of land at the peak of the Japanese, euphoria was worth more than all of the real estate in the state of California.
Wow.
That's
quite the extreme, right? That we're
Well,
talking about.
it's-
Market extremes.
so these are the things that it's only in the benefit of hindsight that you can look back and say that is absurd. But that was the case. The only reason that happened is because people were buying it. People were putting their money into Japan.
Yeah.
They couldn't get enough.
Yep.
And so the rhetorical question today is, right now, people can't get enough of Apple, Google, Microsoft,
Nvidia,
right?
Now it's AMD at the moment as well.
Right.
Joining the
But
fray.
you have the largest companies in the world here, technology companies based in the United States, that they're great companies. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. It's not to say that they're not phenomenal companies, but Apple has a $3 trillion market capitalization, and it's worth more, maybe a couple times more, than all of the companies in the Russell 2000, the small cap index here domestically. But it's also worth more than the entirety of stock markets in other fairly large countries.
Yeah, and even their GDPs as well, right? Many countries' GDPs are smaller than
Mike, can we
market cap.
can we look this up? Let's go and try to find. Let's just look at the market capitalization of foreign stock markets.
Pick one.
Let's look at.
How about England?
Okay, let's look at the market cap of the FTSE. The FTSE 100.
So while you're looking that up,
Hit that first one.
we
What's
can
the market
confirm
cap
it was
of-
it
right
was
there.
the
Come
early
down.
'80s of the.
One of the people, yeah, right there.
It was the early '80s when the Nintendo console came out. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is what I saw there, Michael. So I stand corrected. I stand corrected.
All right, so hold on. So, according to the Google machine,
There you
right,
go.
which it would never lead us astray, at least not intentionally. From reading this right, this says that the United Kingdom market capitalization accounted for, is it 2.4 trillion
$2.4 trillion US dollars.
in December 2023. So if that's the case, then Apple by itself is larger than all of the 100 companies in
The FTSE 100.
the FTSE. Mm-hmm. So in all of the United Kingdom, all those companies combined are worth less than Apple.
Yep. Which is
That
kind
is
of
wild.
It's a wild stat. It kind of compares many of this discussion about things going up in value,
Click on the link and let's just look at the constituents, right?
but going up in value to such an extreme relative to something else, right? So
Yep.
it kind of brings back the idea of when that extreme was probably the most ridiculous in history, in documented history, that is.
Yep.
And that is the tulip bulb
Okay.
era.
Yep.
So that was another era,
Yep.
right? Back in Holland in the 1600s, I think it was, maybe. I'm going to look that up as well. Michael, the Google machine operator.
I'm going to say, here's my guess before he puts it in. I'm going to say 1660.
Okay,
I'm going with 1660.
that sounds about right. 1634, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Price is Right. I'm out because I was over.
So what's interesting is it only lasted 3 years.
Lasted 3 years.
So in those 3 years, let's kind of recount this for a second. Back then, the Dutch Empire was the peak of the world,
Yep.
right? Similar to how we're talking about Japan in the 80s.
Look at this chart.
There you go.
Wow.
And basically what was going on. Many people have heard this story, but we'll kind of just recount it for a second. So at that moment, because of the success and the wealth in that society, people began to really enjoy the finer things in life, right? And that included tulips,
Landscaping.
absolutely, gardening.
Some things never change.
Well, and so tulip bulbs became this infatuation among high society. So they started to, take interest in them, demand, kind of like, demand for people going to Home Depot to buy whatever. What's your favorite, yard landscaping plant?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm the wrong person to ask
Variegated
about that.
privet, maybe?
Yeah.
That's a good one. How about that one? Anyway, so
Don't look that up. Don't look that up.
so
I don't think that's a thing.
I think it is. Variegated privet hedge. Look at that. See, do I know my landscaping or what? So anyway, tulip bulbs,
Yeah.
right? The bulb that creates the flower became very much in demand, right?
Yep.
And as the story goes, they became so much in demand. Of course, they started going up in value, right? And what unfolded was this concept that, hey, even if I don't really like tulip bulbs, I don't really desire to plant them in my garden, I'm going to buy them because it's going to go up in value. I'm going to speculate, kind of like people do today, speculating in whatever.
Yeah.
Let's say Bitcoin, maybe.
All of a sudden, people are making money in these things, and I got to get in.
I got to get in, and
Yeah.
to the point where at its extreme, some of the anecdotal evidence or the stories are, farmers began to say, you know what, I'd rather have a tulip bulb. I can make some money on this thing going up in some period of time. I can make more than I can make on having my cow, right? And whatever I can get from my cow.
I'll trade my cow. I'll trade my house.
Yeah,
right?
even farms, entire farms.
So we need to put that chart, Mike, of the price of these tulip bulbs in there for people to see.
And what's interesting is once the bubble burst, right? And what was the thing that made it burst? Who knows what was the ultimate catalyst? But once once people kind of all of a sudden woke up one day and said, "What the heck am I doing?" Right? This is insane. Then of course it crashed. But what's crazy is it wasn't just tulip bulbs collapsed and people who invested lost money. It led to the downfall of the entire Dutch Empire.
Yeah.
Right? It was such a bubble burst scenario, kind of like what happened to Japan. Right?
Oh yeah, yeah. So interesting story here on the tulip bulbs. So this is just an anecdote, but there's a story that in one of these bars or something over there where people would congregate and trade these bulbs, that there was a guy who accidentally ate somebody's tulip bulb.
I thought it was an onion,
He
right?
thought it was an onion, and he ate it, and they killed the guy. Because I mean, you have just consumed somebody's wealth, right? There is no coming back from that, so fortunately, you can't really do that anymore these days, right? You're not going to eat somebody's wealth like that, but we laugh about it now. The idea that how irrational it was that these things were moving high, were moving higher for something that was, so mundane. But we can really only do that with the benefit of this perspective, right? This time between us and then. And so the question is going to be, at what point will investors look back and say, there's such a concentration in the U.S. markets and these technology stocks that have done very well.
Sure, absolutely.
But is it irrational, right? Does it make sense that one company in the U.S. market should be worth more than all of the United Kingdom?
Right. Or all 2,000 companies in the Russell 2000 index. Right?
Yeah.
Or many other measures. Well, and so another measure of what you're paying for something, right? The value of something versus what is it really worth. And we highlighted this in another one of the extreme videos, is the value of the entire U.S. stock market, right?
Yep.
The market capitalization of the U.S. stock market, and how it compares versus the entire global stock market. So the value of the U.S. stock market relative to the value of the entire U.S. Global stock market. And then compare that to the U.S. GDP and how much our GDP comprises of the world GDP. And then the ratio of those. So, we highlighted how that is at an extreme now, and it rivals that extreme that I think we got to in the late 60s, right?
Yeah, I think 68 was probably the peak of that, right? And we can put that animation maybe in here for people watching, because it is interesting that we would reason that if we represented 20% of the world's GDP, that we should be 20%-ish of the world's market cap, but we're 3 times that.
Yeah,
and
I think we're near 60-something%, right?
Yeah, and so
the value of the stock market versus the rest of the world.
It was in the late 60s when we were also at a point where our market capitalization or representation of world market cap was 3 times our contribution to global GDP. And interestingly enough, in the late 60s is when our markets were hitting a high and went into a period where they didn't make any progress for 12, 15 years.
That's right.
And U.S. investors right now, they cannot even remotely conceive of the idea that could happen.
Sure.
Right? It would be like the Alabama fans trying to conceive the idea that they're not going to be in the conversation for a national championship until 2040. Right?
Yeah. Heaven forbid that, for sure.
I'm going to tell you, there will be a number of coaching changes along the way, if and when that's the case. But it just should remind us that nothing lasts forever.
Right.
And that it's important to keep an open mind.
Yep.
And recognize and try to committing as many emotions or as few emotions as possible to your investment decision making process.
That's right.
Recognize maybe the extremes that you're a part of, and make sure you don't get caught up in it. Because when those things unwind, it can be really painful.
That's right. Yep. And that's, bring it back to our discipline for just a second. That's what we really focus on, is identifying these prevailing trends that are in place, but then also, very importantly, when those trends change and when that cycle changes, being able to adapt to that.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep doing that, and that's a part of our RBID strategy overall. But it's definitely important to be aware of what's going on, and it's interesting for sure when you get to these extremes. It's when you're not at the extremes, it's kind of just, well, that's an interesting point. It's conversational, but when you get to the really unique kind of extremes that we're at today, that's when you kind of really say, well, we need to make this a part of the conversation.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, listen, for today, let's try to wrap it up, but let's do so since it's our first show. I want us to do it by trying to play the bugle.
Oh, gosh.
I've brought in a bugle. Now, I'm not...
Have you practiced already?
No, I have not practiced.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I have not practiced. You know that my body's my instrument, right? So I'm not familiar with the instruments themselves, right?
I understand.
But we're going to have a challenge.
For those that don't know,
right?
Stephen professes to be a singer.
That's right.
Yeah.
So listen, we're going to have a challenge between you and I, and we're going to see who can best play this bugle.
If you're going first, that means I got to put my lips on it after you, which means I'm swapping spit with you.
Well, we can wipe it down.
Maybe we can wipe it down.
Yeah, we can.
Not that I'm worried about anything.
No,
Stephen.
don't be worried about it, buddy. We're not going to make this a super spreader event
great.
here today. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give it a whirl first.
All right.
I'm going to see what can happen, right? So I think it's all in the lips, right?
Do we have this room muffled? We don't want anybody...
Should be more in the rest of the office.
Yeah, it might be.
Here we go. That is
well, this is the sounding of
a
an
very
alarm.
narrow
Right? This
opening in there. I don't know how we're going to have it. All right, here we go. Ready?
I don't know what to say about that noise.
Is that now? If you heard that, what would that signify to you?
That there's an approaching horde ready to...
All right, Chad, we're going to give you.
All right.
We're going to give you a chance
All
here.
right, let's see if I can
wipe it down as you need
if
to.
I can eclipse
right?
that. Well, you got a lot of spit in there, actually. Yeah.
There's no way,
Yeah, you did. Look at that. Yeah,
buddy. That's not gonna bother you at all.
That's Steven's spit in there.
That's not going to bother you.
All right, here we go. Let's see if I can do a
It is. Listen, I'm just going to go ahead and give you a tip.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, great.
It is in the lips, right?
That's what I hear. Right.
It's in the lips, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did not go with the lips first, right? At first, I was just kind of
blowing. But
at first, I was just kind of blowing.
Yeah, there's a
right?
technique.
The lips have to be involved.
There it was.
It's in the. I'm telling you. Yeah, there you go. Wow, that sounded like a sad trombone a little bit, didn't it?
All right, everybody, that was fabulous. Thank you so much for tuning in. Final words before we close out. Bugle Notes, buddy.
Well, no, we're happy we're getting this underway. We're excited to be able to share our ideas about different things with people, and hope that they find it insightful and gives them a little more insight into who we are and how we think about things. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with our next episode very soon.
And of course, we want to invite you to follow us on all the various social media platforms.
That's right. Smash that thumbs up button.
That's right, for sure.
Like and subscribe.
Give us some
subscribe.
us some feedback as well. We'll
right.
take that criticism or feedback.
Yeah, and if there's anything that you specifically want to hear about, want to learn about, write into us.
Yep.
Right. Send us an email, info@reveillewealth.com, and we'll look forward to sharing our ideas with you going forward.
All right.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks
for
buddy.
being here.
My pleasure, man. I'm
Thanks,
glad.
everybody.